out their own imaginings in the sky. They want to usher in the messianic age. They don't mind if it's bottom by nuclear age. They also show.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of our brand new podcast. My name is Jon and I am the stay-at-home atheist.
And I'm Stacey.
Oh, is that all you're going to say?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were going to throw in some clever little anecdote or... No worries. So anyway, before we get started on our first episode, I just want to point out that the song you were listening to in our intro is a song called Afterlife. It's by Shelley Siegel. It's on her first album titled An Atheist Album. You can check it out on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, pretty much anywhere else that you can find music. You'll probably find her stuff. So definitely go check her out. She's awesome. And thanks again, Shelley, for letting us use your music. To give you an idea of what we're all about, Stacey wrote a really killer mission statement, basically, to kind of keep us on track. So she's going to go ahead and read that for you guys.
So our mission is to challenge antiquated views on family values, particularly those in line with religious and conservative perspectives, and to promote secular and forward-thinking alternatives. Each episode will try to cover something interesting from the news and relate it back to our core mission. We also want to try to provide our thoughts on some current news events, what's going on in current events, as well as politics, and anything that might be atheism related.
You know, I guess before we get started into all of that stuff, we should talk a little bit about ourselves, this being our first episode and all. It's probably a good idea to give, whoever might be listening some idea of where we're coming from. So, I grew up in Florida, Stacey in Indiana, but we've both lived in North Carolina for, well over a decade now. We've done that time together for the past near decade. And North Carolina, as you may be aware, is a very conservative, southern, religious, Bible Belt state. Yep. We spent quite a bit of time in the center of the state, near the capital, and we eventually moved to our vacation home on the beach, kind of near South Carolina. And I think what we didn't realize when we decided to move here permanently was how much more southern and how much more conservative it is here than just Raleigh a couple hours away. So we definitely get it from all sides. We live directly across the street from a church. I mean, it's literally the thing across the road from us. There's also a church down on the next block and then one on the block ahead of that one. So in this tiny little community we live in, there's churches everywhere. We have Confederate flags flying in multiple yards near us, including our direct neighbors. Just a lot of southern, I guess I should just say negativity. I mean, I wasn't going to use that word, but it really does at least come across as negative to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a retirement community, an older community, and we had no idea when we moved here full-time what that was going to look like for us.
It's been a struggle. I mean, obviously we have to explain things you don't really expect to explain to your children. Not that you shouldn't explain them, but you just really don't expect to have to tell your children that the KKK was definitely a bad thing. I mean, people around here have on a couple occasions talked about it, not like they support it, but in such a way that they kind of do.
Reminiscing.
Just to give you an idea of what it can be like here in North Carolina, we want to take just a minute to talk a little bit about some recent attempts to force religion into our school systems.
We want to talk to you about North Carolina House Bill 965. This bill, among other things, will force public and charter schools to display the national motto, "In God We Trust," on school grounds.
Before we continue, though, I just want to say a little bit about how absurd I find it that "In God We Trust" is actually our national motto. And I didn't know that for a long time. I just thought it was something we said, but it is officially the national motto of the United States. And I find that peculiar since this is a country that was supposedly founded not just on the idea of freedom of religion, but freedom from religion. Because if you really think of it, freedom of religion is freedom from religion. Your freedom to practice the religion of your choosing is your freedom to not be forced to practice someone else's. And I find it pretty ridiculous that this is our national motto. I think Thomas Jefferson, someone can correct me out there in internet land if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure he's the one who once said, when asked directly about the involvement of religion in this new world, this new country, he's the one who said that there ought to be a wall of separation between the church and the state, which is, of course, why we call it the separation of church and state. So it's cringeworthy to me that we've gone so backward on that principle.
Absolutely. So there are 4 key provisions in the bill that we want to talk about. The first one is requiring the display of the United States and North Carolina flag in each classroom when available.
You know, I don't know that I have a major problem with this, but I do think, because I think pretty much every school already has the flags flying. Like, I've never seen a school that doesn't. Yeah. So it feels like this kind of shoehorning in of language just to make sure no one ever turns it around or doesn't put it up or whatever. And for me, that's kind of like this weird nationalist culture that our country has gotten into really since, the George W. Bush days, since the terrorist attack in New York on September 11th. This idea that we all have to be proud of our country. And I am proud when I have a right to be, and when I don't, I'm not. And I think that's perfectly acceptable. So I don't like this kind of forced patriotism.
Definitely.
So the other thing is that the bill is going to require the display of the national motto, "In God We Trust," but also the state motto, which is "to be rather than to seem." And that has to be displayed in at least one prominent location of the school for both of those mottos.
It specifically calls out that it needs to be in a prominent location, entryway, cafeteria, or other common area. And it seems, by reviewing the bill, this is a modification to a current standard that's out there. So it's almost like they're sliding it in, right? They're trying to slide in the "In God We Trust" because they've also put in there the state motto. So it just seems a little funny and a little unnecessary. This whole bill really becomes something that we see in North Carolina, right? There's always an avenue to try to squeeze in some religious connotation into any bill or any reasoning, but it's always kind of slotted in with something else so that it doesn't seem as bad.
Yeah, well, I think specifically with this one, and this isn't to say they wouldn't have wanted the state motto to be displayed. I'm sure they wanted that anyway, but, and I'm sure it is in lots of schools, not all schools, but probably a lot of them do have it somewhere. But I think by piggybacking "In God We Trust" on the state motto, which doesn't have religious connotation that I'm aware of anyway, what they're doing is saying, oh, well, it's not infringing on the religious views because we have the state motto and we have to have the national one as well. That's our country's motto, right? So I think it's kind of like that. They just want to throw that in there to make sure that they have some sort of a defense to some sort of what I would imagine is an inevitable FFRF lawsuit. So they want some defense,
which we are following.
Yeah, that's already in the works, right?
Yeah, some local requests out to the Freedom from Religion Foundation in looking at this bill, and so as we monitor it, we'll keep you posted on that as well. Another interesting item in the bill is that it will require the recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance be scheduled on a daily basis.
So it's not saying that, it's actually, I think, pretty specific that there is an avenue where children who do not wish to say the pledge do not have to. I believe they can even stay seated, or actually I think, at least this was the talk a while ago, you read this bill more recently than I did, that they have to go out in the hall or something as to not cause a distraction? Or was that just the old letting the kids get away with it stuff when they weren't sure what to do? I can't remember. Sorry.
Yeah, that's not, the bill does say that they do not have to participate. It doesn't, specify what they have to do.
Well, that's interesting because then the schools will decide what they have to do.
That's right.
Sort of reminds me of the NFL right now.
That's for another day.
Yes. So yeah, basically what I find most interesting about this is, even though they're saying very specifically that the kids do not have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance every day, they are requiring the school set aside time for it, which I think seems a little redundant anyway, because I don't know of a school that doesn't do it. I'm sure they exist, and that may be the problem in the eyes of our legislature, but everyone does that, right?
Well, and it's an interesting question. I guess when I remember doing it all through elementary and middle school, though I don't remember necessarily doing it in high school because the structure was so different. And we haven't actually experienced North Carolina high schools in that manner. So I'm not sure if that's a new requirement, and that will be something that we'll have to adjust in high school. So we'll have to do some follow-up on that and get back to you.
Growing up in Florida, we did it in high school. So I would suspect they do it here. This is a very conservative state, but anyway, we could be wrong, and it's kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent. Anyway, the issue for me about the pledge has always been really the same issue I had when we talked about just a few minutes ago about the flags, right? It's forced patriotism. It kind of feels very fascist to me. You know, everyone needs to stand up and shout out that they are going to, support their country, that they are going to love their country and its colors and its, its leaders. And to me, it sort of reminds me of, and this is a little silly, but like the whole, if you have to tell everyone you're a nice guy, you're probably not. Well, if you have to force your citizenry to tell you that they're going to follow you and do what you say, then like maybe it's because you're worried they won't do it. So it's kind of odd. I don't really know if that really follows, but yeah, I mean, I served in the military for 2 enlistments in the Marines, and I have never liked the pledge. I think forcing your people to pledge their allegiance to your country is the very antithesis of what this country ought to be. It's the antithesis of freedom. And yeah, they get away with it because, they don't have to. But we all know what it's probably like. We can imagine what it's like to be a kid who says, I don't want to do this, and be the only one sitting down in your classroom. Or potentially be asked to step out in the hall. Or there's a room for all the kids who don't want to do it. You're being isolated and singled out. And nobody in school, particularly at the middle school and high school levels, wants to be singled out in that way. You do not want that as a kid because you want to fit in. And I think because of that, it forces it.
Yeah, it sets up the reality. Yeah, the expectation that kids are just going to do it because they feel like it's easier than saying that they don't want to.
Absolutely. And I find that patently absurd.
Agreed. So the last piece of the bill,
this is my favorite piece because it's my least favorite piece.
It's ridiculous, is to provide age-appropriate instruction on the meaning and historical origins of the flag and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Just think about for a second what Stacey just said, because what she did there was recite the actual verbiage from the bill. That's all it says.
That's it.
That's the end. So what does that mean? To me, it means nothing. What it seems like they're trying to do here is give themselves a blanket statement that enables them to really handle it however they want. School districts might decide. Individual schools might decide. I imagine it would be a district level thing, though. And here's the thing, like, don't kids have classes already? In history, don't they learn about, like, in American history? I know I learned about the flag.
Yeah.
Right? Of course, I learned that someone made the flag who probably didn't make the flag. But I mean, the class is still there.
Yeah.
So why do we need this language in a House bill stating that age-appropriate instruction on the meaning and historical origins of the flag and the Pledge of Allegiance must be conducted?
And interestingly enough, it doesn't say which flag. It just says the flag.
Well, they mean the national flag, I'm sure.
Well, but they've also called out in the bill the North Carolina flag. So it just seems like this was an afterthought of, we're just going to leave an open hole for us for whatever we want to require.
Yeah, it's a loophole in a way.
Absolutely.
Someone will say, well, we don't agree with this thing. Well, that's what it says in the House bill. And, well, that's not exactly what it says. Well, that's clearly what this means. I think anytime you write legislation that is this level of vague, you must be attempting to sneak something past.
Yeah.
There's no other way. In this, I just did this a minute ago, relating it back to something kind of unrelated. Sort of makes me think of the whole creationism thing. Oh, we're not going to call it creation. We're going to call it what I don't even know. Some sort of science. I forget what they call it, so I apologize there. But that's exactly the same kind of thing. If we're careful about the wording, then we can shoehorn this thing in there that is wrong.
Yeah.
And that's really the problem.
Yeah. So this bill is currently in review. So we'll keep up with it, and we'll let you know kind of where it goes and what happens next. But that's the interesting thing about the bill. That's kind of the gist of it. So, many bills we see out there are loaded with all sorts of stuff. This one's pretty small, pretty minimal, which I think they did on purpose, thinking that everybody would be in supportive of it and they could move it through pretty quickly. So we'll have to keep you posted on that.
So we're gonna go ahead and throw down a link in the description of this video, so you guys can go check out the bill for yourself, read what it says. If you have thoughts on it, you can reach out to us
love to have some discussion and hear what might be happening in your state.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or area.
So real quick, even though we'll do this at the end as well, you can email that kind of information or your thoughts on these kinds of topics to Jon, Jon, at stayathomeatheist.com. And if we start getting some mail in, then we'll read some of that at some point. So the key discussion topic for this episode is going to be all about me. So if you are already tired of my voice and would prefer to hear more of my wife's, don't worry, I don't blame you at all. But you're going to have to suffer through this segment a little bit. I'm sure she'll chime in, but this is kind of all about what I do. So I am a stay-at-home dad, and that's the topic. And it's not just that I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm a stay-at-home stepdad. And I think it's important to point that out for a number of reasons. One, despite the fact that basically everybody anywhere, south, north, west, east, it doesn't really matter, Antarctic, a very large majority of people, or I don't know if it's a majority technically, but a very large percentage of people do get married and then get divorced. And a lot of those people have children in the earlier marriage and have a step parent involved in the family. And that's totally normal and totally fine. And yet we still get this sort of like sad response from people. And I think it boils down to one major issue, and that's that already their biological dad isn't the most major part of their life. But also, since I stay home and my wife works and travels for work a lot of the time, they wind up with a step parent as
Primary.
Their primary care provider in the home. And I think that is problematic for people. I feel like it shouldn't be, obviously, but it really is. And you notice the looks people give you when they realize, you know, like I'm 32, and so someone will be like, well, how old is your daughter? And I say, well, she's about to turn 18. And they do quick math and go, oh, wow, you were really, and I say, well, no, I'm actually their step parent. My wife had Maddie when I was much younger, before we met. So I think you get this weird reaction where people feel sorry for us. It's kind of hard to know exactly what their thought process is, but you see it. It's just right behind their very southern facade of kindliness. You know, it's there and it's always there. So like I said, Maddie is 17 and our son Sonny is 11. And actually they're both very nearly 12 and 18. So that's kind of scary. They were 4 and 10 when Stacey and I started getting serious. I think when we met, Maddie might have been 9, but you know, before I was ever in their lives, they were 4 and 10 years old. So I mean, I've been here for a while, and I've played a pretty major part in their upbringing. And when we first met, I didn't see them as much because they went to school during the day, and I actually had been working nights. So we had to have a babysitter all evening, and the kids were at school all day. Because
I traveled a lot for work, so it was always this shuffle and shift. Who's going to be there with the kids to meet both of our schedules?
Well, yeah, that was really the issue, and that's kind of why we ended up doing this. Was such a small portion of their time was with either one of us, and that became a problem. And then, of course, Stacey started getting raises that put my annual earnings to shame, so it just didn't really make a lot of sense for us to continue to pay babysitters to literally show up after my kids were both in bed and leave before they were up in the mornings.
So they could watch our TV, eat our food, and take all of your salary.
Pretty much. So we decided that I would quit my job and stay home with the kids, and I've done that ever since. And that's been, gosh, do you know how long it's been that I've been doing this?
5 years? 6?
I feel like it was 6. Yeah, I think it's about 6 years.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time now. I mean, I guess a lot of people do it for a lot longer, but for me, it feels like quite a while. Yeah. I mean, I always worked before that, so it was quite an adjustment. And honestly, when I first started doing it, I struggled a lot. Not just with the staying home and being bored stuff, because I've gotten accustomed to that. Well, I'm not bored. I find things to keep myself from being bored. But when you first do it, you don't know what to do with yourself, and it's really difficult. I remember just thinking, well, maybe I'll get a part-time job. You know, I just really wanted to do something. But also there was this, and I'm almost ashamed to admit it now, but embarrassment. So, and Stacey, I'm going to want you to jump in with something here because I don't really know exactly what was said. But yeah. I know Stacey's mom in particular, for example, didn't understand why a dad would stay home with the kids.
Yeah, I mean, my parents are very conservative, always have been. They are still married. They were high school sweethearts. They've lived in the same house since before I was born. Like, they are your traditional family that stays together and does not understand why I would get divorced, why I would get remarried. I mean, it's been kind of the long train of every time I do something to make myself happy, they can't understand, well, my mother can't understand why I would make that kind of decision when it would be, in her eyes, easier to stay with the status quo.
Yeah, and of course she emphasized her mother, but that's because her father just does what her mother does.
Yes.
So
he just listens.
Yeah, he just says, oh, okay. So I was aware that her parents, and as we said, particular her mother, viewed my staying home in a negative way. And so things like that, and reactions I got from other people, it made me feel embarrassed to stay home. And so, but a little before I quit my job, I spent a few months, not long at all because I hated doing it, as a freelance writer for a college information website. I had been a writer when I was in the Marines. I was a journalist in the Marine Corps. So it just seemed like a natural fit for me, but I just despised doing it, so I quit. But after, and I don't think I even told Stacey this for a long time, but after I started staying home, if someone asked me, oh, what do you do? I would say, well, I stay home with the kids and I write on the side. I would just, even though I had not been doing it, I mean, for many months, I would still tell people I did that because I was genuinely embarrassed to tell them that I didn't work. And that's not a way I should have had to feel. And let me be clear, that wasn't all because other people made me feel bad. A lot of that was my own insecurities and view of staying home instead of providing or helping. I never minded Stacey making more money than me. I didn't mind that at all. But when I was no longer financially contributing, I felt lesser. And I think that's a problem. And I think, I mean, I can't fully identify with women on any real topic, but it did give me a little bit of an understanding of how it must feel to almost feel like it's expected of you to not provide, to not earn. So, it was a very difficult time for me. And it's so silly now looking back on it because I'm so content with this. I mean, I think eventually I'd like to do some kind of work, maybe go back to school and
someday I'm going to
study
retire.
Something. Yeah,
I'm
right.
Old.
You'll need something. You'll need me to do something, and I'm totally fine with that. But there was a period where I really, really struggled staying home, and I think, I actually said this morning to my sister. There's really only 3 reactions I get when someone says to me, oh, so John, what do you do? Like someone I just met. And I say, well, I stay home with the kids. I really get one of three reactions. One, confusion and like this. I hear, oh, I hear that a lot. I mean, like a lot. 2, this is going to seem odd that I think this is almost just as bad. But number 2 is, oh, that's so great. Oh man, you just get to stay home and do whatever you want. And like, don't get me wrong, for the most part, I do whatever I want, but it's more than that. I have children with whom I'm responsible for, or for whom I'm responsible. No, that doesn't work. I'm responsible for children in my home. I don't do the best about keeping things clean. I've never been very, very neat and organized, but there are things I need to accomplish and I accomplish them. So I'm almost just as offended by those responses because they view what I do as nothing. And it's not nothing. It's not a lot all the time, especially not on a daily basis, but overall there's a lot that I do responsibility-wise. And then the third is kind of what we've already talked about with Stacey's mom. And that's, though I don't know that Stacey's mom ever displayed disgust, but disapproval. But I get a lot of like genuine disgust. People just do not understand how I could possibly be happy at home. But it's like, and I think Stacey once told me, she said this to her mom. She said like, her mom said to her like, well, how can you be happy at home? And she said, well, would you be asking that if it was me staying home? Exactly. And she honestly said no. Yeah. She wouldn't. And that's the same exact thing. People don't feel the same way when a woman stays home because there's still this, like our mission statement said, this antiquated view on what a traditional family should be and is ideally. And I just disagree with that. So this has really just become our lives now. Yeah. And we're very happy with it. I'm happy every day.
It works really well for us. It is our normal. It is how we are.
And honestly, I wouldn't change it for anything. I don't care what other people think about it. I'm happy. My wife is happy. Our kids are happy. And the dogs are happy. But, they're also our kids.
So we'd like to finish the episode with what we are calling a discussion about atheism. And while I may be an atheist, this is definitely Jon's area of expertise, not mine.
I guess you're going to have to listen to me a little bit longer this week. Or, well, I said this week. How about this episode? Because we're going to do them every other week. This bi-weekly broadcast. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about labels. I actually originally had a different topic in mind, but it occurred to me that, especially for our first episode, I need to get labels out of the way so you understand what I mean when I say atheist or when I use any of these terms. So before I really get into that, I think it's important to note two issues. One, I think labels are great. Loads of people disagree with that. I think they're great. They're a quick way to get across a fairly large bit of information. That said, when they fail, when there's confusion, you need to drop them and explain. So that's what this episode is going to be about right here. I'm going to drop the labels by explaining the labels. That way, moving forward, if any of you have listened to this episode, you'll understand where I'm coming from. If not, I can refer you back to this one. The second thing that I think is important to address before we start is that dictionaries do not tell you what words mean. They tell you how words are used. And I bring that up because very regularly people will challenge my usage of the word atheism by saying, well, this dictionary definition I found says something else. That's great. That's fine. But it probably also says my view, and you're ignoring it. And if it doesn't, well, plenty of other dictionaries will, and it doesn't matter because I'm telling you what I mean by it. So all of that out of the way, atheism is, for me, simply a rejection of the God claim. Somebody says there is a God, and I say I do not accept that as true. This does not mean that I accept it as false or that I'm making any sort of positive claim. I may well make a positive claim when I believe the God concept presented to me is impossible. If you told me that God was something that I could demonstrably prove to be untrue, then obviously I would reject it and say positively it does not exist, and here's why I hold that belief. So while theism and atheism address the issue of belief, one being that you do believe in a God or gods, the other being that you reject that belief, which, by the way, does include people who assert positively that there is no God, because they also obviously hold the belief that there is no God. You don't have to assert it, but if you do, that doesn't make you not an atheist. So I just want to throw that out there just to get rid of any confusion. But then there's another word. There's Gnostic or Gnosticism and agnosticism. One obviously being the rejection of the other, and that's of knowledge, right? So you can be a Gnostic theist, someone who not only claims to believe a God or gods exist, but also claims to know a God or gods exist. You could also be an agnostic theist, though while I suspect most theists probably fall under that category in some way, probably many of them wouldn't accept that because what they're using no in a way that's different than what I would use. But again, that's all about labels. So you have to hear what they're saying and address that issue. So an agnostic theist would be someone who accepts the claim or holds the belief that a God exists, but recognizes that they can't know that for certain, right? They don't, of course, I guess you can't know anything for certain, but that's a totally different topic for a totally different episode. So similarly, a Gnostic theist would be somebody claiming not only to disbelieve in the claims made by theists, but also that they know no gods exist. And an agnostic atheist is somebody who, just the opposite, of course, does not accept the claim that a God exists, but also recognizes that they don't know. And of course, you probably have heard of the famous Dawkins scale where you rate where you are, as far as belief and non-belief goes. But it's not really terribly relevant for how I feel because I don't use the Dawkins scale. For me, it's very simple. I have not been convinced that a God exists, but I don't know. And I think while I understand why some would claim to know, in their opinion, that there is no God, I just don't think you can really get there. Though I'm totally open to having my mind changed. So once again, that's Jon at stayathomeatheist.com if you'd like to let me know your feelings on that. So I guess I'll just go ahead and wrap up this discussion topic, this atheist discussion. It's a very short one, but I felt like if I didn't get this out of the way now, that eventually we'd have problems in these discussions. So that's how it stands. I label myself an agnostic atheist, but I'm happy to just chuck that out the window if it confuses somebody or if they aren't following or they aren't using the same definitions. And I'll just tell you, I don't believe, but I don't claim to know. It's as simple as that. And I think a lot of atheists tend to hold that perspective, but I've met plenty who don't. So there's no harm in having a different view than I have. And like I said, send us an email and we can talk about it some more. So that's it for this episode's discussion about atheism. And if you didn't already agree with me, well, I hope I gave you something to think about.
So that brings us to the end of the very first episode of The Stay-at-Home Atheist. We hope you've enjoyed listening to us, and we'd love to get some mail from you. So find us on Facebook and Twitter by searching The Stay-at-Home Atheist, or you can shoot us an email. It's Jon, Jon, at stayathomeatheist.com. Or you can drop us a line in the comments. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe.
Bertrand Russell once said, "The good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge."
Till next time.
Thousands are humming, the second coming's coming. The environmental responsibility is succumbing to the suicidal longing for paradise. Can't they see it's already before our eyes? All that makes us who we are, we find cannot survive without our mind. But you're so afraid to